America's Most Wanted had been running for 25 seasons when it was canceled in 2011. In that time, the series had covered countless crimes in the hope that the general public could help police put the offender behind bars. The call to action and often repeated line of "Remember, you can make a difference" prompted viewers to contact authorities with any information and helped bring numerous criminals to justice. These are 5 America's Most Wanted criminals who were found. Number 5. Michael Jason Registe was arrested after viewers of a 2008 episode of America's Most Wanted led police to his whereabouts on a Caribbean island. Registe had fled to the United States after taking the lives of 2 Columbus State University students in what authorities described as an execution-style attack. He was already known to authorities when the crime took place. He was wanted for another attack that left a man who had been trying to buy drugs from him badly injured. That had been 2 years ago, but Registe had spent the time hiding in the US Virgin Islands. He returned to Georgia in May of 2007, though authorities hadn't caught up with him again by the time his next attack would take place. High school friends Brian Kilgore and Randy Newton were found dead in a borrowed Chevrolet Blazer on July 20th, 2007. Witnesses described hearing shouts, seeing the car roll backwards before it hit another vehicle, and then came to a stop, and a man climbed out of the back seat and fled on foot. The 2 students had suffered bullet wounds to the back of their heads, and neither would survive. Police tracked down the owner of the vehicle, who told them Brian had asked to borrow it to meet up with a man called Mike. He'd given the owner a number to contact Mike, and when Brian hadn't returned the car, the owner called the number. Mike told him Brian had left 2 hours earlier and hung up. Police used the phone number to identify Registe as the culprit, but by this point he had already fled the US. The trail went cold, and a year after the deaths, he was placed on the Most Wanted list. Viewers led police to the island of St. Martin in the Caribbean, where he was arrested. He was later given 2 life sentences. Number 4. Stephen Ray Stout featured on America's Most Wanted in December of 1988, almost a year after he took the lives of his ex-wife and her stepmother. Stout had been married to Sharon Kraft for a little under a decade, and they had 2 sons together before Sharon filed for a divorce. It hadn't been an easy time. At one point, Stout had served a short time in prison for taking the life of another man during a fight. By January of 1988, Stout and Sharon had divorced, and Sharon had a court order against him to keep away from her. He also hadn't seen his sons since October, and later claimed Sharon had been keeping them away from him. Stout had violated the court order and was set to start another prison sentence on January 25th. On January 22nd, though, he visited his ex-wife's mobile home. According to Stout, he hadn't thought anybody was home. His only intention had been to go in to pick up a rifle that he had left there. Instead, he found both Sharon and her stepmother, Bonnie Kraft. Sharon tried to phone the police, and Stout pushed her out of the way. It was at this point, Stout claimed, that Bonnie slapped him across the face. Stout allegedly suffered from PTSD brought on by childhood experiences. He claimed the slap triggered his disorder, and he had no memory of what happened after that. He took the lives of both women before stealing his ex-wife's car and fleeing. According to Stout, he woke up in a snowdrift with blood on his clothes and no memory of how it got there. He bought a newspaper, which told him he was wanted for what he had done to Sharon and Bonnie. Instead of turning himself in, Stout went on the run. Police were able to track him for a short while before losing him. Stout made his way to the Mississippi Gulf Coast, where he began to work as a laborer and took on the name Billy Johnson. Stout had settled in Mississippi for about a month when he was put on the FBI's Most Wanted list and appeared on America's Most Wanted. A woman he had been living with recognized Stout from the show and approached him about it. Thankfully, Stout didn't harm her, but did confirm he was the man the police were looking for. The woman contacted the show and Stout was arrested. Despite claiming he had no memories of the attack, Stout pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 2 life sentences. Number 3. Wardell Ford and his accomplice, a distant cousin named David Temple, already had criminal records when they planned a September 1983 robbery that would take the lives of 2 people. Temple had been arrested from prison just 3 years earlier after being found guilty of an armed robbery and being sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison. He was released after just 2. Ford had also been convicted on a separate armed robbery but received a lighter sentence of 2 to 5 years in prison and was released after 18 months. It seemed both hoped working together would give them a better chance at not being caught. The 2 men spent weeks monitoring stores in the Grand River Greenfield area of Detroit. Most importantly, they kept the track of routines of the Purolator guards who would pick up money from stores for safe transit to banks. Once they decided on their hit, the 2 stole a vehicle and the following day followed 61-year-old Charles Birmingham into one of the stores on his route. They waited for Charles to make the cash pickup and headed to the store's elevator to make his exit. As Charles waited for the elevator, they both drew their pistols and announced the holdup. Charles didn't comply, taking out his own gun and trying to wrestle away Temple. As Temple and Charles fought, Ford fired at both men. He then grabbed the bag of money and fled. The would-be robber and Charles were both taken to the hospital, where they died from their injuries. Ford escaped with the money and the car stolen the day before. After driving a short distance, Ford swapped cars to another he had already prepared, drove to another area and caught a taxi. From that point onwards, police had no idea where Ford or the money was. Ford had managed to get away with more than $40,000. He was on the run for more than 6 years before he was placed on the FBI's most wanted list in December of 1989. The following month, the case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries, but it wasn't until September that America's Most Wanted highlighted Ford's crimes. After the show, authorities were contacted by multiple people who knew Ford. Ford had adopted numerous fake names and official IDs from multiple states. He ended up in Connecticut, where he worked as a painter and where authorities finally arrested him in 1990. He was sentenced to life in prison. Number 2. Pedro Estrada had once had a promising career as a professional boxer, but by the time he was in his mid-20s, he left the ring and became known for another kind of hit. Given the nickname, the Pistol, Estrada became an enforcer for a drug ring running in New York City in the 1980s. He was believed to be responsible for the deaths of at least 5 people, though he continued to deny many of the crimes he was accused of, even after being convicted. Estrada became friends with members of a drug ring after a knockout in a Madison Square Garden bout brought an end to his career. By the start of 1986, he'd already embraced a life of crime, having been arrested twice for robbery and weapons possession. In June of 1986, Estrada was part of a group responsible for the deaths of 2 people. A customer allegedly owed the gang money and hired a hitman to take out one of the gang members. Estrada and 3 others took the lives of the customers and one of his girlfriends, while another woman was left badly wounded. They tried to make the scene look like a robbery gone wrong before fleeing. Luckily, the second woman survived and was able to identify Estrada and his accomplices. It wasn't Estrada's last hit, though, as a few months later, he took the lives of 3 more people while working for the gang. After the second attack, Estrada went on the run, taking his girlfriend and their young son with him. In the meantime, the 3 other men involved in the earlier attack had been apprehended and put on trial. With the details of the crimes being revealed in the trials, the extent of Estrada's criminal career became known. As well as 2 previous hits, Estrada was suspected of a number of other deaths, including that of a drug dealer and an innocent bystander. He was classed as armed and extremely dangerous, but it wasn't until early 1988 that he was finally put on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. In February of that year, a segment on America's Most Wanted featured the criminal. Law enforcement received multiple tip-offs, including one which revealed Estrada's new address in Philadelphia. Estrada was arrested at his home and convicted of 2 murders and 1 attempted murder. Number 1. Jack Farmer became the FBI's public enemy number 1 after he overpowered his own lawyer to escape custody in 1987. Farmer was the leader of a mini-mafia organization and was awaiting trial for numerous crimes when he made his great escape. Before his initial arrest, Farmer ran a drug ring responsible not only for the distribution of illegal narcotics, but also countless break-ins around the Chicago area used to fund his activities. Farmer was known for being ruthless and wouldn't let anyone stand in his way. As well as drug peddling, burglary, and racketeering, he and his gang were believed to have taken the lives of 2 people believed to be informants. In April of 1986, Farmer, his wife, and 13 others were indicted on suspicion of being a criminal gang. In the lead up to the trial, Farmer was held in custody while his wife was released on bond. The following April, Farmer was released into the custody of his lawyer in order to prepare for the upcoming trial. Alan Blumenthal had just finished having lunch with Farmer when the criminal approached him with one of the lawyer's own ties. Farmer instructed his lawyer to stay quiet and give him 10 to 15 minutes to make his escape, before tying his hands behind his back and gagging him. He then made his escape, changed out of his prison uniform into clothes his wife had brought him, and his wife was waiting outside and the 2 fled. Authorities were only alerted after Blumenthal's secretary came in to check on him and found him still tied up. It was 2 months later that the case was featured on America's Most Wanted, just days after he'd become the public enemy #1. Robert Niewiadomski and his wife Kathy moved into a Palm Beach County neighborhood at the end of April. They got on well with their new neighbors, and Robert soon landed a job at a public supermarket warehouse. Those who knew the family believed they were good people and couldn't even imagine them getting a parking ticket, so it came as a shock when residents realized their new neighbors as the Farmers when the segment of America's Most Wanted was aired. 25 people contacted the show with information about Jack Farmer, and on June 2nd, 1988, the couple were arrested. Farmer was eventually sentenced to 40 years in prison for his crimes, while his wife served 20 years. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.